Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Drew. Thank you for bearing with us while we work on season 2 of the show. There's a lot of great guests coming up. I'm going to be doing some solo episodes, tons going on behind the scenes, and some major changes in the works as well. So thank you again. Season 2 is coming soon, I promise. Today's episode is going to be a one-off show with director Michael Lukk Litwak. Michael's feature film debut, Molly and Max in the Future, is hitting theaters on February 9th. He's got a great cast attached to it. He and I had a chance to chat in Austin, Texas back in November, and he's just got such a genuine, amazing approach to filmmaking. I think you'll really enjoy the film. Go see it if you can. I don't want to say too much more, so without further ado, here's my interview with Michael. I know I told you this in person in Austin, but I was really inspired by your session at Masters in Motion, mostly because you were just so open and so transparent. I think people kind of forget to just give a little peek behind the filmmaking curtain and be like, yeah, this is what our production timeline looked like, and this is what our budget looked like, and we did most of these effects ourselves, and those kinds of things. So before we dig into anything else, I mean, why don't we just start right out of the gate with your big project coming out on February 9th? If you can tell us what's coming out and tell us a little bit about the film, that'd be great.
So the movie is called Molly and Max in the Future, and it is a sci-fi romantic comedy. Kind of the quickest way we explain it is that it's When Harry Met Sally in space, because it kind of takes the story of two people meeting each other over and over again over the course of 10 to 15 years, and they kind of start off as a little bit opposites, and they kind of learn from each other and grow from each other, fall in love in the process. But it kind of takes place in this Futurama, Rick and Morty-esque sci-fi universe where kind of anything is possible. And so we're kind of combining a lot of the classic tropes of a romantic comedy with a lot of the classic tropes of science fiction and fantasy. The concept is to kind of try to take a very common experience that a lot of people can relate to and, turn it up to 11 and use metaphors and allegories to kind of explore dating and what it's like to be in a relationship in 2023. But I have such a love for classic science fiction, and I wanted to kind of tell that story and update it for today and make it feel relevant and different.
It really struck me how and I mean this in the best way possible, how DIY the whole thing felt in this really great and interesting way. Especially you have some pretty big name talent in there. Who are you working with on this film as your main actors?
Zasha Mamet is the female lead, and she was in Girls on HBO and Flight Attendant, and the male lead is played by Aristotle Atari, who was a stand-up for many years and also a sketch comedian, and he also was on SNL for a season. Just a really nice person who's super talented and a lovely guy.
Have you worked with bigger name talent in the past on other projects, or is this kind of the first time?
I spent about 10 years making shorts, and in a couple of them, we had some actors who had been on TV, and then, since the short was shot, they have gone on to do more and more TV. And so, I've worked with a wide range kind of actors that have almost no experience, and then actors that have a decent amount of TV experience. But the cast in Molly and Max was definitely a step up in terms of their notoriety and their fame and their experience level. And it definitely was a little bit intimidating. I think the other thing is, I have kind of a no assholes policy, and I really try to seek out nice people, and especially when you're making a low budget film, because you just don't have time to waste on somebody being a baby about something. You check references and you talk to people that know somebody who worked with somebody, and you just say, hey, can you hop on the phone for 5 seconds and tell me if that person's actually as nice as they seem? And I was really happy with both of them, and they really were such team players, and you really need that on a small movie. And then I think one of the things is once you get people like Ari and Zasha in the leads, other actors see that and they say, oh, this is a real movie. The movie was worthy of their attention, because I think people can sometimes read a script and if they like it, but if it doesn't have some kind of legitimacy behind it, it's hard for them to kind of take the risk on it.
Yeah, I give you credit for sticking to your guns, even just as simple as having a no assholes policy on set. I mean, the takeaway for me is no matter what level you're operating at, it's sticking to your guns and sticking with what you believe is going to create the best environment for you and for those around you, I think is super important. Is this a wide release or limited, or what is it? What's it going to
We're in
run
the
at?
process of booking theaters right now, but it should be in somewhere between 50 and 100 theaters. So it all depends kind of on the next week or two. Because it's a smaller movie, we kind of book the theaters at the last second often. If you aren't Barbie or Oppenheimer, those theaters don't want to give you screens unless they just have them kind of sitting around. So we've already gotten, confirmation of about 25 theaters, and we're adding new theaters every day. And we're going to be announcing that a couple days before February 9th. We have a 30-day exclusive window in theaters. So if it does well, it'll be there second and third and, fourth weekend. But, most likely it'll probably be one to 2 weekends if we're being realistic.
I mean, I know we came right out of the gate with talking about Molly and Max, but like, it seems like world building is kind of like a big thing for you. That's kind of like the apex of what you've been working towards in film. I guess if I had a question around all that, it's like, what is the importance of world building to you? Or does that help you create if you can, kind of fabricate the specific space or environment where any particular story will take place?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of go back to the beginning of how it all kind of started.
Please.
I grew up in Los Angeles, and the movies that kind of got me into filmmaking were Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, kind of big budget spectacle action adventures, and that's really what captivated me as a kid, and that's really what made me fall in love with movies in the first place. And then as I kind of got older, I found myself gravitating towards a new type of movie, which was maybe a little bit more character-driven, stuff like Annie Hall or the Before trilogy, or, Amelie, and stuff that's kind of about people living their everyday lives and trying to figure out what they want and who they are. And, I knew I wanted to make movies from a very young age. And then I knew I wanted to go to NYU or USC. I since I grew up in LA, I just kind of wanted something different. And so I had my sights set on NYU and was lucky enough to get in, and then went there. And just in the kind of process of making things, like, I think being an artist is kind of about like training your bullshit detector, where you like create something and then you look at it and then like the bullshit detector goes off and you're like, that little bit right there, that's kind of bullshit. Let's get rid of that. And you kind of slowly just file away and file things down until you have something that you're like, oh wait, this is good. And then in the process of doing that over and over again, you kind of realize you're like, oh, I actually, what I do like is this. And so I just kind of started doing YouTube tutorials about like how to, key green screens and learn all of those skills. And, that kind of came to a head with my thesis film, which was The Life and Death of Tommy Chaos and Stacey Danger. And that we made on a soundstage, the NYU soundstage. And we, had 100 students that worked on it, but that was because we had like a different first AC every day of the shoot. I was like, well, if we can do a one location movie and it's easy to get people to show up to help you out on it, if it's in the center of Manhattan or it's someplace very easily accessible that people can take the train to. But let's do a one location movie, but it's all inside a studio. And we're going to turn that studio into 5 different locations. And it was kind of this like light bulb moment where I was like, oh, this is how I can kind of have my cake and eat it, where I can do independent films that are small and intimate, but still make things that feel very big and kind of scratch that itch of like world building and fantasy and science fiction. And so part of that is like, over the years, a lot of my writing process is kind of about like you come up with an idea of like what is the feeling that you're trying to capture, what's the experience you're trying to capture. And so with Molly and Max, it was really like, okay, let's do a one location movie, and if we have to shoot it all on green screen, we will. And luckily, we had 1 week on an LED stage, but it was a tiny studio in Manhattan on 27th Street. But it's great because a lot of the logistical stress of filmmaking and moving locations and getting people food and finding where the bathroom is, like all of that is kind of taken out of the equation.
I think a lot of people maybe even are reluctant to get started because of barriers like, where am I going to shoot this? When am I going to shoot this? And obviously there's challenges that go along with that. I feel like my evolution was very similar, where I loved Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all that stuff. And then one day, like, I started liking movies and not really understanding why I like them. I was just like, man, there's something about this that just keeps me coming back. And one of them was definitely Amelie, still one of my most favorite, like, beautiful films ever. The other one was like, one of the other ones is Lost in Translation. I think that I'm very in line with you there, where it's like, you want to marry these two things together, and oftentimes they don't intersect. And I think that's what drew me to your work, is like, you're making them intersect. I mean, you showed a lot of behind the scenes material when you gave your talk in Austin. And I remember one thing in particular. I believe it was from the short. I don't think it was Molly and Max. I think it was from your thesis film, where you were filming a cockpit scene, spaceship cockpit scene, against a green screen. And to get the motion of the cockpit of the ship flying through the screen, you literally had like exercise balls underneath. You put the cockpit on a few of those and just had people rocking it back and forth. I'm like, well, this is brilliant. Can you speak a little bit to like the DIY approach? Was it always out of necessity, or is it more just like, this is how you like to work?
I mean, it definitely evolved a little bit out of necessity, in the sense that, like, we just didn't have money to hire someone else to do things. And then I would waste a bunch of time finding somebody who says that they can do it, and then I would spend money hiring them to do it, and then they wouldn't actually be able to do it, and then I'd have to find another way to get that thing done anyways. And so it kind of was like, oh, I can spend 6 hours emailing a bunch of people, spending the time to do that, or I could spend 6 hours like going online and finding a tutorial. But again, a lot of it comes down to like in the writing process of, like, you know, in one of my shorts, there's a sequence where they're skydiving, and you know, we obviously don't have the budget to go actually skydiving, and we also don't have the budget for like a fake skydiving like thing, you know, those places. But
The wind.
The wind tunnels, yeah. But I went online and I looked up just skydiving scenes, and I go on YouTube and I'm like, what are other examples of skydiving scenes and how did they shoot them? And in Star Trek 2, I think the J.J. Abrams one, they have a skydiving sequence, and there's like behind the scenes online about how they pulled it off. And they stood their actors on Apple boxes and they put a mirror under them, and then they filmed them from above. And you know, they just got a high angle and shook the camera a little bit, and it looks like the camera is in front of them and they're, you know, going through it in space. And it was just like such a simple thing that was like, oh, you just need a mirror and a sky and a high angle to pull this off, but it's a huge movie. And so I remember I was talking to a friend of mine and I was like, what are the best action scenes you've ever seen? And he was kind of like, he sent me a clip from Lord of the Rings, and he's like, I think this is a great example of how filmmakers think that things need to be more complicated than they need to be. Because if you look at the scene from Lord of the Rings, you have a character fire an arrow in one shot, and then you cut to another shot, and the arrow's already inside the guy. You don't see it go in. It's like you see one person fire it, and you cut to the arrow already mounted, and that's so that you don't have to like have some sort of rig where the arrow hits them, or you know. And so it was just like such a simple thing that like any film student can rig a fake arrow. He was just like, this is a great example of like huge movies use very simple solutions very often. And at this point, you know, I'm hopefully going to be working on things where we could potentially have budgets that we hire those people with. But at the end of the day, like, your process, I think, really does influence your style. And if you offload that to somebody else, then it's going to affect the style of your film. And because there often isn't a right answer, and different people kind of have different biases and philosophies on what they think looks good. And you have to kind of figure out some of those things for yourself. And the only way to kind of do that is to kind of get your hands dirty and learn some of those concepts.
But, you know, even from coming at it from like a cinematography side, some of the more beautiful scenes or more like epic scenes I've ever seen shot, it's so funny if you ever get to see half the behind the scenes, it's like some dude with a foam board just bouncing some light into somebody else, and you're just on a really pretty location, and that's it. Like, simple's usually the way to go. And I think that's like a mantra that more people should embrace, because I think oftentimes, especially now with so many tools that are at our disposal, it's like so easy to complicate things.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think like keeping things simple is so important, and part of what makes something simple is what's available. But it's a question of kind of hunting and digging and kind of through the scrap yards of the internet and figuring out like, what can I combine that would make sense and that fits the story and fits the character and still looks cool and doesn't look like a compromise. You know, if if people are thinking, oh, you did that because you had no money, then, that's not what you really want. You want people being like, oh my God, they came up with something really creative and unique and interesting. And that is, always the goal.
Why film school? I'm not knocking it or praising it. I'm just so curious because it seems to be in the film world there's it's like kind of an age old debate. It's like to film school or not to film school, and just kind of curious what your take was on it.
My dad's a lawyer, and my mom worked in documentary and news for a long time, and so they were kind of they sent me to like movie camp when I was in 7th grade and stuff, and were very supportive and encouraging. And so it was like, well, my parents were very much pressuring me to go to college. And I was like, well, I want to spend that time in researching something I actually want to learn. I think one of the things that film school does for you is that you never have to wonder if you should have gone to film school. Because it feels like the people that don't go to film school often are sometimes self-conscious about it. And I think the truth is, like, I feel like I took a lot of advantage of NYU. I 100% do not think you need it in order to be a successful filmmaker or to learn filmmaking. And I had a couple of really great professors. Really, the biggest benefit is to meet the other people. I met my wife there. I met everybody that worked on this movie there. It's like filmmaking is a community sport, and you need a community of people to help you do it.
Yeah, I asked the question because when I know someone has gone to a film program, I always just like to take a temperature because I think, anybody, no matter what you go to school for, not just film, it could be anything. I think most people that are full on adults would agree that like school is never what you think it's going to be fully. And
Yeah.
it never fully prepares you for being out in the world and fending for yourself, whatever that looks like for you, right? But you did say, the thing you hit on a couple times I found really interesting is, having that little set of time, those precious years kind of set aside where you can just focus on you and what you're pursuing, I think is so super valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And I do feel like I was able to really fully take advantage of the school. There were often people that just didn't like put effort into their projects, and then we would have to spend time like critiquing something that somebody really just didn't care about. And I was kind of like, why are we wasting this time? So I don't know. I got to shoot on their stage for free. I got to use their cameras. I got to, use a free crew. I could never have made my short films without those free student crews. And I got to learn a lot by being on set. And I think that is one of the honestly more important things, is to work on small film sets and work on student film sets, even if you aren't in the film school, because you're not going to get a chance to be a department head unless it's on a student film.
Talk to me a little bit about commercial directing, because I know that's something else you also do. Where did commercial directing come from, and how do you view it currently?
I love making movies, and I like shooting projects, and I love working with my friends, and I also like getting paid for it. So it's like, I have had some really amazingly good experiences on commercials, whether or not it's on your own project or on an ad for Subway sandwiches. Like, it's still really fun. Like, the process itself is rewarding when it comes to like just the filmmaking side of it. Like, I don't love dealing with agencies and brands, but it has, I think, taught me a lot about patience and how to kind of work with other people that might not necessarily be as like film literate. Or I really just hate the amount of time that it takes to basically direct a commercial from start to end in theory by making a pitch deck that explains every single shot of something. And then they put you up against 2 other commercial directors. Often they have made their mind up ahead of time about which one is their favorite, and they're kind of just wasting your time. And you never know if you're the person who they have chosen ahead of time or not. So it really is a part-time thing where I use it to kind of fund my addiction, which is independent filmmaking. And so I use it to pay my rent, and I've had some really great, experiences. I've also had some very frustrating ones, which I think is par for the course.
But, I asked the question because I want the straight shot, and I don't want to paint an unrealistic picture. And it's like, yeah, commercial work it pays the bills for lots of people. Like lots of big filmmakers still make commercials because it helps fund all their other projects. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like this is a business. Like you need to be involved in the business part. And if it helps you get to where you want to go and you pick up something valuable along the way, then great. I mean, if you can walk away from each commercial job having learned like one new skill or gotten an insight that might help you in your own project, then I feel like it's totally a win. Do you do, like, from the standpoint of writing, are you writing exclusively for yourself? Have you ever kind of stepped outside of that and like written for other people or other projects?
You know, I'm not necessarily like opposed to working for other people. It just hasn't necessarily come up. So, you know, the kind of like spec screenplay hustle is like its own thing. And I've just always had more success as like a writer director because I have the power to kind of go out and produce my own stuff and not necessarily like wait for other people to be interested. So, you know, I think if somebody came to me and they had a bunch of money and they wanted me to write something and they're willing to pay me, like I'd be super open to it, but I'm not really like holding my breath and waiting around for those opportunities. I spent like 7 years basically writing a new script and a new pilot every year. And I was able to get a little bit of money for some of them, but now those projects are tied up and I can never use them. In the grand scheme of things, like I would have rather directed some commercials or, you know, even edited some branded content, something that maybe pays a little bit less. But then, you know, if I would hold the rights to that script now. So, you know, it's a trade-off. I find it really, I try to, when I write a movie, put 110% into it. And I find it really like distressing when a project doesn't get made because I put so much time and energy into it. So I don't want to kind of like relinquish that control onto somebody else.
You seem like you've developed this whole like philosophy of sticking as much to your guns as you possibly can. And, you know, I think it's commendable, and I think it's good advice for anybody out there. You know, if you can weather the storm, you know, the more that you keep in your control from a creative perspective, the more it like benefits you down the line.
I think that people, like, what people don't realize is that as soon as someone else is paying for something, you have somebody that you're answering to. And that's also something that I've learned in commercials. And you can get very good at collaborating with those people. And, you know, I still am proud of a lot of those pieces of work. And I think I really do enjoy collaborating with smart, intelligent people and working on something together. And I think part of being a good director is like not having an ego and being able to recognize an idea from somebody. At the end of the day, like any of the flaws of the film are my fault, and they're not because somebody else has imposed their will on the project. And I'm really, really happy about that. You know, like you hear stories about other filmmakers that somebody else pays for their movie and they spend 3 to 5 years making it. And then, you know, the financier just completely ruins it afterwards and fires them or hires a new editor or, you know, and their baby just gets completely destroyed. And so it's a risk. And you really, again, you have to do your research about who you're getting into bed with. You have to have enough confidence in yourself to say no and to walk away and to say, like, I try to just be very upfront with people about like, this is the movie that I want to make. There's always room for improvement. There's always a margin of error. Like, it's not every single word needs to be spoken exactly as I've written. You know, I think, like I said, I do think being collaborative is really important, but I think you need to be on the same page about what you're trying to make. And I think one of the biggest hurdles is casting, because I think casting is one of those areas that, you know, it is very hard to quantify, and producers often think about it in a very non-creative kind of logistical way. And there's a balancing act that needs to happen where you need to find people that are high profile enough to give you exposure and to separate you from other projects. But at the same time, you know, I feel like there are a lot of financiers who they'll come to you and they'll say, we have $100,000. I need you to buy a car. And you're like, oh my God, there's so many great cars we can get for $100,000. And they're like, okay, but it does need to be a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari. And you're like, we can't afford that with $100,000. And, you know, this is talking about actors as if they're, you know, pieces of machinery, but that's often how they look at them, where they're like, well, the only way that we're going to make money is if that we resell a Ferrari for more than $100,000. And while at the same time, there are an incredible amount of very well-known and insanely talented people out there that want to work on cool stuff.
I guess the question I want to ask is about value, right? And this is a little bit more abstract because, especially being in the film industry, there's a lot of things that feel like you're always fighting for yourself. And it's not necessarily like an ego thing, but you're just like, it always feels like an uphill battle in a lot of ways to like keep yourself top of mind for people or get the next job or whatever it is. What are your thoughts on just like providing value to like your contemporaries, whether that's, you know, filmmakers directly or just creatives in general? Is there value in the value, I guess? And or what does that do for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people assume that in order to be taken as legitimate, that you need to like pretend to be bigger than you are or pretend to be more successful than you are. And I think this is also just, I guess, life philosophy too, is that like you actually connect more with people via vulnerability and by showing your weaknesses than necessarily your strengths. And
I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I think especially in today's day and age where there is a lot of promotion, like pressure to self-promote, I think people can smell bullshit from a mile away and it doesn't ingratiate you towards them. And so, you know, I don't really share like a lot of like personal information on Instagram or on social media in terms of like life troubles or you know, personal backstories or stuff like that, which I know some people do. But, you know, I kind of see it as like I have some skills. I learned them because other people were nice enough to kind of share them with me online often. And if there's somebody else out there that is looking for that kind of stuff, like what a better way to get a fan than to help someone out and do it in a way where, you know, it took me an hour or 2 hours to kind of put together those PDFs on my website, and a lot of people have downloaded them, and hopefully they'll turn out and go see the movie. And if they don't, that's okay too. You know, like I said, like I learned so much of what I do by watching videos online of the way that other people have done stuff and the way they pulled it off. And that's what makes it feel possible for me. And, you know, I just emailed somebody else who I had listened to their podcast and it had been helpful to me 5 or 10 years ago. And I just emailed them and said, you know, I really appreciated all the advice you gave on that. I'd love to go on the podcast and do the same thing. And it's like, I think obviously that is self-promotional too, because I'm trying to get the word out about the movie. But I do think that I have stuff to say that I think other people could find helpful.
It's like you're trying to put your best foot forward and get your passion project really out into the world. And like what's the better way to do that? Like just be a self-promo whore, or you come at it from like a very authentic place and like, look, this particular show did a ton for me when I needed it. So hopefully I can do the same thing for somebody else. So it's like paying it forward a little bit. And by the way, this is because of that past experience. This is where I am now. Please check out my film. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's very authentic and great.
Thank you. Yeah. I try to do that. You know, I think it's yeah, I also think that like part of the joy of filmmaking is hearing the stories behind how things get made and how people pull things off, because I think it's called movie magic for a reason. And getting to see the magic behind things, or also sometimes realizing that something magical is actually very simple, is its own type of magic.
Yeah, I think that's a really great place to leave things. Before I let you go, where can people find you, and where can people find out more about Molly and Max?
So my website is www.michaellitwak.com. That's Litwak. If you Google Molly and Max, that's Molli, Molly with an I. I'm sure you can find the film somewhere. We're also on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're going to be posting a ton of behind the scenes footage from the making of the film over the next couple of weeks. And then the movie's going to be in theaters across the country on February 9th. And then after that, sometime in March, we're going to be on video on demand. So I have a mailing list on my website that I'll be sending out emails, kind of keeping people updated on once we know where the theaters are going to be. And, I'm on Instagram. I probably use that more than anything. So my tag is just my name, @MichaelLitwak.
That's awesome. I'm super excited for all the behind the scenes stuff. It is legit. You should definitely check it out. Well, thanks for being here, and send a congratulations to your wife, Joanna, who just won an Emmy. Am I right?
Yeah, she
For
won an Emmy.
editing the bear. Hopefully we get to talk to her soon too. But yeah, tell her congrats, and thanks so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was a really fun time.
All right, there you go. That was my interview with Michael Litwak. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll get out to theaters to see Molly and Max in the future. I'll put all of his information in the show notes. And again, thank you for supporting the show. We have more to come, and we'll see you soon in season 2 of No Set Path. Take it easy.